If you've ever looked at your bank statement and thought, I don't even know where that went, this video is for you. You're not bad with money, you're not lazy, and you're not undisciplined. There's something quieter going on, and it's called money anxiety. Anxiety doesn't make you overspend by making you reckless. It makes you overspend by making each individual purchase feel responsible, necessary, even smart, while the bigger pattern quietly drains your account. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why do I overspend keeps coming up in your own head, and how to actually catch it. If this kind of psychology of spending breakdown is useful, consider subscribing. This channel is built around money psychology and behavioral finance. Why you don't notice it happening. Most people picture financial anxiety symptoms as panic, sweaty palms, checking your bank account at 2 a.m., financial stress keeping you up at night. That version exists, but it's not the version responsible for most of the overspending you don't understand. The quieter version looks like this. You buy the extended warranty you don't need, because the what if it breaks thought is louder than the math. That's emotional spending in its most disguised form. You over-research every purchase for hours, only to buy the same thing you would have bought in 5 minutes, because the anxiety was never really about the product, it was about control. You keep saying, I'll start budgeting next month, and next month never quite arrives because looking directly at the numbers feels worse than not looking at all. You tell yourself you'll cancel that subscription, return that item, cut back next paycheck, and somehow the follow-through never comes, not because you don't care, but because each of those small actions requires looking directly at something your nervous system is actively trying to avoid. This is what catches people off guard. Anxiety rarely shows up as fear. It shows up as effort, as just being careful, as I'm just being responsible, and that disguise is exactly why emotional spending habits are so hard to spot. They don't feel like a money problem. They feel like good judgment. One of the clearest signs of emotional spending is the justification itself. If you've ever caught yourself explaining a purchase to no one in particular, building a case for why it was actually fine, that's usually the tell. The brain rarely admits, I'm anxious, so I'm spending to feel calmer. Instead, it writes a reasonable-sounding story, and you believe it because you're the one who wrote it. The mechanism, safety spending. Here's what's actually happening underneath. Anxiety is your brain's threat detection system working overtime. When it's active, your brain stops asking, is this a good decision? And starts asking, will this make the discomfort go away right now? That single shift is behind most emotional triggers for stress spending. And it explains why the purchases rarely look reckless. They look careful. Psychologists sometimes call this pattern safety spending. Buying not to acquire something, but to manage a feeling. It overlaps heavily with what's been studied under retail therapy. Psychology. The item is rarely the point. The point is the few minutes of relief. A few common versions of this: over-insuring everything. Extra warranties, extra coverage, just in case purchases stacked on top of each other, because the anxious brain overweights worst-case outcomes. Underneath it is often a scarcity mindset, a subconscious money belief that there will never quite be enough, no matter how much evidence says otherwise. Stockpiling. Buying in bulk, keeping a cash cushion so oversized it actually costs you an opportunity cost, not from genuine need, but from a nervous system trying to manufacture certainty. This is a textbook expression of fear of being poor, even in people who are financially stable on paper. Comparison spending. Buying something not because you want it, but because someone else's stability, a coworker's new car, a friend's vacation photos, triggered a flash of, am I behind? This is often rooted in money shame. The purchase isn't about the item, it's an attempt to quiet the shame of comparison. None of these look irrational at the moment of purchase. Each one feels like the responsible choice. Stacked together over months, they form the slow leak that leaves you staring at your statement, asking the exact question this video opened with. The loop that keeps it going. Here's why it doesn't just happen once. When you spend to relieve anxiety, the relief is real, but temporary. The discomfort returns. Your brain, having just learned that spending equals relief, reaches for the same tool again. This is the avoidance loop, and it's central to what researchers studying money and mental health keep finding. Anxiety rises, you spend or avoid to relieve it. Relief fades, Anxiety returns, you spend again. From inside the loop, it never feels like a pattern. It feels like a string of unrelated, reasonable decisions. That's exactly why it's so hard to catch. There's no single moment that feels like the problem. The problem is the accumulation. And it's why so many people quietly wonder, why can't I save money even when their income looks perfectly fine? This is also why willpower alone rarely fixes it. You're not failing at discipline. You're running a coping mechanism that happens to cost money. Often, underneath that coping mechanism sits something older. A bit of money trauma, shaped by how money was, or wasn't, talked about earlier in life. And the loop doesn't only show up as spending. Sometimes it shows up as avoidance, not opening the banking app for weeks, letting a bill sit unopened past its due date. It looks like the opposite of overspending, but it's the same loop wearing a different mask, quietly letting small problems grow into bigger ones. How to actually catch it. So, how to stop emotional spending in practice. Name the feeling before the purchase. Before any non-essential spend, ask, am I buying this or am I buying relief? You don't need a perfect answer. Just asking the question interrupts the automatic loop long enough to create a real choice. Track the trigger, not just the transaction. Most budgeting tracks what you spent. Try tracking what you felt right before you spent it. Within 2 weeks, patterns usually become obvious, and once you see the trigger, you can address that directly instead of medicating it with a purchase. This is one of the fastest ways to learn how to control spending habits without ever opening a spreadsheet. Build a non-spending relief response. If spending is your brain's go-to anxiety reliever, it needs a faster, cheaper substitute. A 2-minute walk, a text to a specific person, a breathing exercise you've actually practiced beforehand. Separate true risk from felt risk. Anxious spending responds to felt risk, not statistical risk. A simple gut check. What would actually happen if I skipped this right now? Usually reveals the real-world risk is far smaller than the urgency suggests. Give yourself a waiting window. Anxiety has a built-in clock, intense but temporary. A simple 24-hour rule for non-essential purchases outlasts the spike. This one habit alone is often enough to break the spending cycle, since most anxious urges fade well before the window closes. Together, these 5 steps are really the starting point for learning how to fix money mindset at the root. Because once you can name what's actually driving a purchase, anxiety loses its biggest advantage: disguise. You don't overspend because you're careless. You overspend because anxiety is very good at disguising itself as care, as preparation, as responsibility, as just being safe. Once you can name that pattern, you take away its disguise. It stops being just being responsible and becomes what it actually is: a feeling asking to be managed directly instead of paid off indirectly. That single shift is the real foundation of a healthier money mindset and, eventually, a genuine wealth mindset. Anxiety isn't your enemy here. It's a signal. It only becomes a problem when it gets routed through your wallet instead of toward an actual solution. The goal was never to stop feeling anxious about money. It's to make sure that when the feeling shows up, you're the one deciding what happens next. Not your card, not your cart. If this resonated with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because anxiety is rarely the only emotion running the show.